bringing you every running back start sit in each and every matchup. Starting it off in the first game this week, it is going to be the Ravens versus the Chiefs. If you look at the Chiefs and Ravens money line over on the Vegas sportsbooks, we know that this is going to be a high scoring game. I, of course, am starting Isaiah Pacheco. You drafted Isaiah Pacheco in the first 3 rounds. Of course, you're starting Isaiah Pacheco, and I'm also starting Derrick Henry for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, when we're looking at the backups, we got CEH for the Kansas City Chiefs. We got Justice Hill for the Baltimore Ravens, and really neither of these guys we can really rely on unless something were to happen to starter. And I can't predict that. You can't predict that. So I'm actually sitting both CEH and Justice Hill in this Thursday night game. Moving on to the next game, we have the Panthers versus the Saints. And honestly, this is going to be a pretty low scoring game according to the Vegas sportsbooks. Main reason is both these offenses, we need to see the improvement from the Panthers with Dave Canales, but we're also seeing Derek Carr lead this New Orleans Saints offense. So I am starting Chuba Hubbard because really Jonathan Brooks, their second round running back, is still out. He's going to be on the PUP list, recovering from that ACL that he tore in college. He's going to be eventually making it onto these start sit rankings because Jonathan Brooks is super talented. I think if you drafted him in the 8th round, that's absolutely amazing. But Miles Sanders, we saw what he was last year. He's dust. He's still dust. Have him sitting this week. We got Alvin Kamara. You have to start Alvin Kamara, top 4 on a points per game basis last year. And him and Chris Olave are the only 2 main weapons in this offense. We heard Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams as the backups. I'm not starting either of those guys. Have no trust and faith. It's been a while since Jamal Williams put up those huge touchdown numbers for the Detroit Lions. That did not happen last year for the Saints, and it's not going to happen this year. Moving on to the next game, we have the Bengals versus the New England Patriots, and I'm excited to watch this game. I think there's a lot of reasons a lot of us are excited to watch this game, to see Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow finally back healthy together. And when we're looking at the Patriots' overall rushing attack, we're starting Ramondre Stevenson. I have Ramondre Stevenson as a top 20 back this week. So excited to see how Ramondre Stevenson is going to work with Jacoby Brissett and how this overall offense performs. You're going to have to sit Antonio Gibson. Don't have a lot of trust in Antonio Gibson this week. But when we move on to the Bengals, I am starting both Zach Moss and Chase Brown. We've talked about how Zach Moss is the Thunder, Chase Brown is the Lightning. And I think you drafted both high enough that, especially if they're both in an RB2 predicament for you and you have to decide which one you want, I would just start both because I do think both are going to get plenty of run. And I think this week in particular, it is a little bit risky because we don't know who's going to be the number 1, but we do know that we will figure that out after this week. So I feel comfortable starting both of them. I'm not saying that I think both their upsides are a little bit capped with each other, but I do think both have safe floors. We move on to the next game of the week. It's going to be an AFC South showdown. We got the Texans versus the Colts. So I'm starting, of course, Joe Mixon. Got to start Joe Mixon. Excited for that overall touchdown upside that he's going to get. It'll be exciting to see the receivers. So when you see the wide receiver start sits, we'll discuss kind of how that looks, but we're sitting Dameon Pierce for sure. I don't trust any of these backup running backs. I didn't trust Dameon Pierce last year. I'm not going to trust him this year. But when we move on to the Colts, we are going to be starting, of course, Jonathan Taylor. You drafted Jonathan Taylor in the back end of the first. Of course, you're going to be starting your studs this week. Start Jonathan Taylor, but we will be sitting Trey Sermon. Unless we're in like a super deep league, I think you could maybe talk me into the upside of a Trey Sermon in this type of game. But like I said, especially in your normal 12, 2x2, 1 flex formats, I am not starting Trey Sermon at all. We move on to the next game. It's going to be the Titans and the Chicago Bears. And we look at the overall odds. We're looking at about 45 points over under is kind of where the sports books are projecting this game to go. So as always, we are continuing to start the starters. So I'm starting Tony Pollard and I'm starting DeAndre Swift in these games if I have them. Now, the debate is going to be with Tajay Spears. I have Tajay Spears as a sit. I know a lot of people are excited about the third down role that he is going to have on this Titans offense. I just think everything that we saw was Tony Pollard getting 75% of the touches with the starters in the preseason. So even if Tajay Spears is able to get like a 40% role, I don't know if that's going to be enough on week 1 to start him, especially when you have better options in your lineup. So I have Tajay Spears as a sit. You might debate me on that one, but of course we're also sitting Khalil Herbert. I don't trust the backup running backs for the Chicago Bears getting enough run to have any sort of fantasy football production. We move on to the next game, and we are going to have the Broncos versus the Seahawks. And the overall totals over on the sportsbook for this game is around 42 to 41 and a half points. So they think this is going to be a super low scoring game. I think it's going to probably be a lower scoring game, but you do got to start Javonte Williams. You do have to sit Jaleel McLaughlin. I know we've talked in a video. Put out my stashes video yesterday. We talked about how Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Esme, they're really great stashes. It doesn't mean I'm starting them this week. When I say a stash, that's a high upside shot, but when we're making these hard start sit decisions, I am starting Javonte. I'm not starting Jaleel McLaughlin. And then when we look at the overall running backs for the Seattle Seahawks, we're starting Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker is going to get enough run. I think he's a lot more talented than Zach Charbonnet. Even though Zach Charbonnet last year got the draft capital, he wasn't able to supplant KW3 RB3. I don't think that's happening. So I'm going to be sitting Zach Charbonnet. I think he is going to be looking pretty. I got him on a lineup as my RB3, so I hope he does get some run this year, but I could not put Zach Charbonnet as a starter this week. And we move on to the next game, and I'm really excited to see how this game ends up playing out because it's the Dallas Cowboys versus the Cleveland Browns. And both of these offenses are good, and both have really great defenses. But when we look at the Vegas Sportsbook's projections, they have them kind of right down the middle, right around 42.5 to 43 points. And so this isn't the highest score. I mean, we're going to talk about a lot more high-scoring games that Vegas has projected because I think both of these defenses are pretty elite. Especially when you're drafting your defenses for fantasy football, both these defenses should have been top 3. I am starting Zeke Elliott. I just think the volume that he's going to get is going to be enough. I think he does find pay dirt in this game. And that's going to be enough for me to say, hey, we're starting Zeke Elliott. I'm sitting Rico Dowdle and Dalvin Cook. I'm not even messing with any of the backups for the Cowboys. And then we're starting, of course, Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford's gotten a ton of hype in the camp from the beat writers, and there's going to be no Nick Chubb in the first week. So no way you're starting Pierre Strong unless you're playing in some super deep 16 to 20 team lineup. We'll move on to the next game, and it's going to be the Rams versus the Detroit Lions. And this is always an interesting, it's like Matt Stafford versus his old team. The Vegas Sportsbooks have this projected as one of the higher ranked scoring games with 52.5 points. So for the Lions, we are starting both the running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. You were having to make those type of decisions last year, but they both, even though both were kind of hurting each other's overall upside, they both were performing really great on a fantasy points per game basis last year. So feeling good. If you drafted Gibbs, you drafted Monty, start both of them. And then when you're looking at the Rams, you're starting Kyren Williams for sure. Kyren Williams was that league winning running back last year, but they drafted Blake Corum this year. And so a lot of people, I think Blake Corum, as we get longer into the season, as we start to see the splits really take hold, how does Blake Corum overtake and kind of take more of this role and responsibility in the backfield? We'll have to see, but I have Blake Corum as a sit this week. We move on to the next set of games. We have the Packers versus the Eagles, and it's pretty simple for me when I'm looking at this game. The Vegas Sportsbooks have this projected at 48.5 to 49 points, so they think this is also going to be a pretty high scoring game. And so when I listen to the Sportsbooks, we say, hey, Josh Jacobs, you were going to be starting for us anyway. It's a massive start for you, especially with no sincere backup running back. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd, there's been reports that he's not even up to par where he should be at this point heading into the season, and they lost A.J. Dillon to the IR. So Josh Jacobs is going to get majority of the work. I think he's going to be a 3-down bell cow for the first few weeks of the season. Absolutely have to start Josh Jacobs if you have him. And then, of course, with the Eagles, you're starting Saquon Barkley. You will be sitting Kenneth Gainwell in your lineup. I know Kenneth Gainwell had some fantasy football relevance last year. I just think with them bringing in Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Gainwell was getting a little bit on third downs. That's going to be the full Saquon Barkley role as well as early down role. So give me Saquon Barkley. Of course, you're starting him. You got to feel good. We'll see where he ends up in my tier rankings, but you are going to be starting Saquon Barkley this week. We move on to the Vikings versus the Giants. And honestly, if we look at the Vegas Sportsbooks, they have the projected score at 40.5 points. They think this is going to be a super low scoring game, and I do not blame the Sportsbooks at all. We have Sam Darnold as the first time starter for the Vikings, and then you got Daniel Jones starting for the Giants. I love some Malik Neighbors. I love some Justin Jefferson, but it's going to be a little bit rough sledding here for this team. But you're starting Aaron Jones, first time for the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, a lot of people are excited about the volume potential of Ty Chandler. I'm sitting Ty Chandler. I'm starting Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones should get some checkdowns. Potential has some touchdown upside, but I think there's more volume at play here for the start for Aaron Jones. And then we move to the Giants and Devin Singletary. A lot of you love some Devin Singletary. And I think Devin Singletary is just a jag. I think Tyron Tracy, we're going to be talking about Tyron Tracy pushing Devin Singletary later on in the season for a lot more work. But we'll have Devin Singletary as a start this week. And then, of course, we'll be sitting Tyron Tracy. Week 1, it's always a little bit easier to pick your start sits because you're just pretty much starting the studs that you drafted. But I know that you guys want to see how I'm viewing these players in each and every matchup. We move on to the next game, and it's going to be the Steelers versus the Falcons. We got the redemption game for Bijan Robinson against Arthur Smith. And the stat line for this and the money book on Vegas is going to be at 42.5 points. So when we're looking at Bijan Robinson, I think Bijan Robinson's a start. Now, I think the debate is going to be if you're in a deeper format and you need to potentially start Tyler Algier, how is that going to work? Do you need to start Tyler Algier? What his workload is going to be like? Because we saw that there was plenty of splits in the Arthur Smith offense, but now moving on to this Raheem Morris team, how is that split's going to work for Tyler Algier? We'll have to figure that out. But then we look at the Steelers, and we're going to have to start debating. This is going to be the problem we're going to have with the Steelers all season long is we're back with Arthur Smith here. And so I'm starting starting Najee Harris, and I said maybe for Jaylen Warren just because Jaylen Warren is battling that injury. So if it's kind of like getting to the point and it's like a game time decision, I'm probably just sitting Jaylen Warren. I know there are teams where I have Jaylen Warren as an RB2, so I know it's going to be probably a week 1 decision, to start sit decision on Jaylen Warren. There's a chance Jaylen Warren turns into the running back that we want to own in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, but I think you do have to start Najee this week, just knowing kind of the injury risk that Jaylen Warren does possess. We move on to the next game, and it's going to be the Cardinals versus the Bills, and I'm super excited to see this game. 47.5 points is the projected money line on the Vegas sportsbooks, and I'm excited to see Kyler Murray. I'm excited to see Marv. I'm excited to see Josh Allen. We're starting James Conner for sure. James Conner gives you, we talked all offseason in the running back rankings, gives you like 13 good games. I think this is probably one of the 13 in week 1, and we're sitting Trey Benson. Trey Benson will be pushing James Conner for work later on in the season, but right now I'm sitting Trey Benson until we see further confirmation of Trey Benson being an absolute dog. We'll move on to the Bills. Really, I have no faith in the backups. So Ray Davis, you will be sitting. I think a lot of people like Ray Davis as like a stash because they see, hey, this is an absolute desolate running back core. So James Cook should be getting a majority of the work, which is exciting. I do think they're going to use Josh Allen as their goal line back in the end zone, in the red zone. So I do think James Cook's overall upside is a little bit capped. That's why I didn't have him as a top 10 running back in my rankings. But if you drafted him where you drafted him, you are 100% starting James Cook this week. The next game is going to be the Jaguars versus the Miami Dolphins. And I'm excited for this game, a 49.5 point line on the Vegas sportsbooks. This means high scoring game, a lot of excitement. So of course, you're going to be starting Travis Etienne for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You drafted Travis Etienne. I saw him go in a draft, the 112 last night. There's no way you're not starting Travis Etienne. You're starting him. So you're sitting Tank Bigsby because we've heard the rumblings. They want to use more of a committee with Doug Peterson. He says that every year, and we didn't see that last year. If Tank Bigsby steps up and starts to push Travis Etienne for some of those touches, we can definitely revisit this discussion later on in later videos in later weeks. But Tank Bigsby, you are a sit this week. And then when we move on to the Miami Dolphins running back core, you're starting Devon Achane, you're starting Raheem Mostert, and you are sitting Jalen Wright. I do think Jalen Wright is a potential great. I saw a video yesterday of someone calling Jalen Wright a stash. He's going in like the 10th round, so I don't necessarily view him as a stash, but I do think Jalen Wright might have later round potential, might have later round fantasy football value if for some reason one of these two guys were to get hurt, which I pray not because I drafted a ton of them. But that is how I view the Jaguars and Miami Dolphins start sit. We move on to the next game, and it's going to be the Raiders versus the Chargers. We get to see this Jim Harbaugh offense up close and personal, a 42.5 point money line. They think it's going to be ground and pound, and I think that's why for Zamir White, you got to like it. We know with Aiden O'Connell, how is this passing attack going to look? We know with the Chargers, with Justin Herbert, but with not a ton of great receiving weapons, with only Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, I think Gus Edwards, instant smash start this week. You got to start Zamir White too if you do have him because you probably drafted him as your RB2. I don't think we can start Kamani Vidal as much as I think he's a great late round stash. We'll have to see. Maybe there's going to be enough volume. Maybe this is going to be the Lions of last year where they need 2 to 3 running backs to perform on a weekly basis. I don't think that's the case. I'm sitting Kamani, and then of course Alexander Madison I'm sitting as well for the Raiders. The next game on the agenda is going to be the Commanders versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this is a Jaden Daniels versus Baker Mayfield showdown. And like I said, this is a 425 game, 40.5 point line on the Vegas Sportsbook. They think it ain't going to be a high scoring game. I don't blame them. It's a rookie quarterback, and we got to see the Buccaneers without Dave Canales. So you're starting Rashad White, you're sitting Bucky Irving for Tampa Bay, you're starting Austin Eckler, and you're sitting Brian Robinson Jr. And there's a chance in this offense that Brian Robinson's actually the one that we're going to want to be starting each and every week. I just think right now, based on all the analysis, all the fantasy football ADP, I know we're wrong in the community all the time. I just think we wouldn't be taking Austin Eckler ahead of Brian Robinson if there wasn't this type of discussions happening behind closed doors, filtering in through the beat reporters. So I'm starting Austin Eckler. You can maybe make the discussion that you shouldn't start anybody on the Commander side this game, but I do think Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson Jr., you're sitting Brian Robinson Jr., but I'm excited to see this offense with Jaden Daniels. And the last and final game of the slate is going to be the Jets versus the San Francisco 49ers. I'm so excited to see Aaron Rodgers. It's a 45.5 money line game on the Vegas sports books. And so you're starting CMC if he plays, and I believe he is playing. Yes, you're worried about the calf a little bit. I am still starting CMC, drafted him 101. Don't overthink it. I think a lot of people are hyped about Jordan Mason, so maybe if you have CMC, you grab Jordan Mason just in case anything happens. But then on the Jets side, you will be starting Breece Hall. We saw how electric Breece Hall was. You drafted him in the first round of your redraft league, and then you're going to be sitting Braylon Allen this week. So if you like fantasy football, if you want to have me answer your start sit question, let me know down below. Answering all start sit questions this year. Hit that like and subscribe button on the way to 3,000 subscribers, and I I will catch you on the next one. Peace.